November 1943. Bougainville Island. Solomon Islands chain. Most people have never heard of Thomas Michael Callahan. He was not a general. He was not a decorated war hero whose face appeared on magazine covers. He was a high school teacher from Montana who spent his weekends tracking elk through the Bitterroot Mountains. But in the first 2 weeks of November 1943, this quiet unknown man accomplished something that military historians still struggle to explain. Using nothing but empty soup cans, pieces of wire, and broken wooden stakes, he killed 112 Japanese soldiers in 5 days. He did not defeat them with superior firepower. He did not overwhelm them with reinforcements. He destroyed an entire battalion's intelligence network using garbage. Literal garbage. The kind of trash that Marines kicked aside without thinking. And by the time the Japanese commanders understood what was happening to them, their ability to see the battlefield had been completely shattered. If you think this sounds impossible, you are not alone. The Marine Corps officers who first heard about it thought the same thing. But what happened on Bougainville was not luck. It was not exceptional marksmanship. It was something far more dangerous. It was the weaponization of human curiosity itself. The Pacific Theater in late 1943 was a nightmare of green darkness and invisible death. American forces had landed on Bougainville on November 1st, pushing into territory the Japanese had held for nearly 2 years. The jungle was dense. The terrain was unforgiving. And the Japanese snipers were everywhere. They owned the treetops. They knew every shadow. They fired once and vanished, leaving behind only dead Marines and unanswered questions. American casualties from sniper fire climbed week after week. Patrols disappeared into the jungle and never returned. Officers were picked off mid-sentence. The psychological effect was devastating. Marines began to fear movement itself. They hesitated before raising binoculars. They froze at the sound of breaking branches. The Japanese had achieved something more valuable than territory. They had achieved dominance over American perception. Every rustle in the canopy might be death. Every gap in the foliage might conceal a rifle barrel. The Marines were not just losing men. They were losing confidence in their own senses. Standard counter-sniper tactics failed repeatedly. American snipers tried to locate Japanese positions, but the enemy was too disciplined. They never fired twice from the same spot. They never exposed themselves unnecessarily. They were patient, methodical, and utterly lethal. By early November, the 3rd Marine Division had lost over 200 men to sniper fire alone. Something had to change. But nobody knew what. Nobody except a quiet sergeant from Montana who had spent his entire life learning how to think like a predator. Thomas Callahan grew up in country so wild that a missed shot was not just a mistake. It was a lesson. In the Bitterroot Mountains of western Montana, if you misread the wind by an inch at 600 yards, you did not wound an elk. You simply watched it disappear into the timber, knowing you would not get a second chance. That environment shaped him long before the Marine Corps ever issued him a rifle. He learned patience, not from instructors, but from freezing mornings spent motionless in the brush. He learned discipline not from drill sergeants, but from the mountains themselves, which punished anyone who tried to rush. Most importantly, he learned something that would become the foundation of everything he did on Bougainville. He learned how living things behave when they sense something unusual. He learned exactly when curiosity overrides caution. He learned how to predict the moment when a creature stops listening to its instincts and starts moving toward danger instead of away from it. When Callahan enlisted after Pearl Harbor in December 1941, he blended in with thousands of other volunteers. Nothing about him looked extraordinary, but the first time he stepped onto a rifle range, the instructors noticed something unsettling. He did not shoot like the others. Most Marines fired as soon as their sights touched center mass. Callahan waited. He watched the grass bend one direction, the heat mirage drift another, the target sway half an inch in the wind. He fired only when all three aligned. To the instructors, it looked slow. To Callahan, it was the only moment that made sense. He posted one of the highest scores of the training cycle, not because he was gifted, because he refused to take shots that were not on his terms. He was transferred to Scout Sniper School, where Gunnery Sergeant William Henderson taught a lesson that would change his life forever. Henderson stood before the class and said 7 words that Callahan never forgot. "The shot is the end of the operation, not the beginning." Henderson explained the difference between ordinary snipers and true predators. A sniper who seeks targets is predictable. A sniper who creates targets is a threat. And a sniper who shapes the enemy's decisions before they even know he is there becomes something else entirely. Most students struggled with that concept. Callahan did not struggle. He leaned into it. Because that was exactly how he hunted elk. You did not chase the animal. You positioned yourself where the animal would have to go. You created the conditions that forced it to make the one move it could not afford to make. During stalking exercises, the difference became obvious. Other students tried to get close. Callahan tried to get forgotten. In the final test, instructors with binoculars scanned the field for hours. They spotted movement from nearly everyone. But Callahan produced nothing. No shift of grass, no flash of metal, no silhouette out of place. 9 hours later, he simply stood up and said calmly that he had been ready for about 15 minutes. Henderson pulled him aside after graduation. "You are thinking like a hunter," he told him. "Good, but stop assuming the enemy is an animal. Animals run from danger. Soldiers investigate. Learn that difference, and you will outthink anyone you face." That single correction would become the hinge upon which the entire Bougainville operation turned. Callahan arrived on Bougainville in the first week of November 1943, expecting a brutal fight. He did not expect the moment that would define everything. For 7 days he operated like any other Marine, holding lines, running patrols, trying to make sense of a jungle where every shadow looked like a firing slit. The Japanese snipers were everywhere and nowhere at once. But the shot that changed Callahan's life was not one he fired. It was the one that killed the man beside him. November 8, 1943. 0647 hours. He and his spotter, Corporal James Rivera, were observing a suspicious patch of brush. Nothing special, nothing obviously hostile. Rivera raised his binoculars for 3 seconds. That was long enough. A single round from nearly 600 yards away struck him without warning. Rivera dropped instantly. No struggle, no final words, just the thud of a body collapsing into the mud. Callahan did not move. Not because he was brave, because he understood immediately what had happened. A sniper that disciplined does not fire twice. A sniper that's skilled does not expose himself with follow-up shots. Rivera was not killed by luck. He was killed by a predator who understood patterns as well as Callahan did. So Callahan lay there for 30 minutes, unmoving, barely breathing, letting the jungle settle around him. He was not scanning wildly. He was not panicking. He was thinking. Piece by piece, the geometry formed in his mind. The angle of the binoculars, the arc of the bullet, the position the Japanese sniper had chosen. He knew exactly what kind of man he was dealing with. Disciplined, patient, methodical. Someone who would not fall for standard counter-sniper tactics. That night, sitting alone in a shallow foxhole, Callahan struggled to find an answer. He was not searching for a weapon. He was searching for a blind spot, a flaw in Japanese training, a human instinct strong enough to override discipline. He thought about predators and prey. He thought about Henderson's warning. Animals run, soldiers investigate. He thought about all the times he had watched elk freeze at an unfamiliar sound, and the times he had seen hunters make the fatal mistake of standing to look. Why do people investigate things they should not? Why do soldiers expose themselves to unknown stimuli? The answer came from a direction he did not expect. While eating his evening ration, a can of chicken noodle soup, he set the empty tin beside him. As the sun dropped behind the ridge at 1823 hours, the last rays of light struck the can's rim and threw a sharp beam across the jungle floor. Callahan froze. A flash. A pinpoint of reflected sunlight. A signal that was not a signal. Something so small, so ordinary, that no doctrine on earth had prepared anyone to interpret it. He rotated the can slightly. The beam swept left. Another rotation. The beam swept right. In that moment, the idea solidified. Not the trick itself, but the principle behind it. The Japanese sniper who killed Rivera was disciplined. But even the most disciplined soldier must investigate the unknown. Curiosity is not a weakness. It is a necessity. Callahan did not need better accuracy. He needed to manufacture the exact moment when a sniper forgets fear and leans out to look. The morning of November 9th, 1943. 04:45 hours. Callahan did not report to a firing line. He reported to a pile of garbage. While the rest of the battalion prepared for another day of jungle chess with an invisible enemy, Callahan quietly collected what everyone else ignored. Empty ration cans, bits of wire, broken stakes, the kind of junk men kick aside without thinking. He picked 5 soup cans that still had enough reflective surface to catch sunlight. He understood something crucial. If you want to manipulate a human response, the trigger must behave the same way every time. He was not building weapons. He was building stimuli. Before dawn, he moved 300 yards behind friendly lines to a clearing that overlooked Japanese positions. He planted the cans on thin sticks at slight upward angles. Not random, calculated. He rigged simple string controls to adjust the angles by a few degrees. The goal was not to signal. The goal was to almost signal. Because ambiguity is more dangerous than clarity. A single flash looks like chance. A second flash looks like coincidence. A third flash from a different spot looks like intent. And soldiers cannot ignore intent. At 0615 hours, the sun cracked through the canopy. The cans began to flash. One long glint, a shorter one. Then silence. To an untrained eye, it meant nothing. To a trained observer, it looked like visual communication. That was exactly the point. 20 minutes passed. Nothing happened. Callahan waited. Patience had been his weapon since childhood. Then at 0637 hours, a figure eased out from the tree line. Not bold, not careless. The posture revealed everything. He was not surfacing to attack. He was surfacing to understand. He lifted binoculars toward the flashing cans. Callahan was not near the cans. He was 90 degrees to the flank where no one expected a threat. One controlled exhale. One steady squeeze. The soldier collapsed backward into the brush. Before sunset, Callahan had 9 confirmed kills. All created, not discovered. The soup cans did not reveal the enemy. They shaped enemy behavior until revealing themselves became inevitable. When he reported to battalion command that evening at 1930 hours, he expected skepticism. Lieutenant Colonel O'Brien asked one question. "How many do you think this could eliminate if they do not adapt?" Callahan did not exaggerate. 20 to 30 in a week. Maybe more if they react the way trained observers always react. O'Brien did not blink. Then you have 5 days. Full freedom of maneuver. Your objective is simple. Break their ability to see the battlefield. That order changed everything. It was not kill snipers. It was not thin their numbers. It was destroy their perception. Because when an army cannot trust what it sees, it cannot act. And when it cannot act, it loses. Not by force, but by paralysis. The first day had proven the concept, but Callahan knew the real test was coming. The Japanese were disciplined. They would adapt. They would learn. They would try to understand the pattern and defeat it. What they did not know was that Callahan was already 3 moves ahead. He was not just setting traps. He was building a system that would grow more lethal with every passing hour. A system that would turn their greatest strength, their rigorous observation doctrine, into their greatest weakness. The sniper who killed Rivera was still out there. 700 yards of jungle separated them. But Callahan was no longer hunting a man. He was hunting a mind. And in Part 2, you will see exactly how he found it. How a single fake command post and a pattern of calculated flashes drew out the most dangerous Japanese sniper on Bougainville. How the hunter became the hunted. And how 27 men died in a single day because they could not stop themselves from looking at light. November 9th, 1943. By sunset, Thomas Callahan had proven something that no military doctrine had ever anticipated. A quiet sergeant from Montana, using nothing but empty soup cans and reflected sunlight, had killed 9 Japanese soldiers in a single day. Not by outgunning them, not by outmaneuvering them, by exploiting the one weakness that no amount of training could eliminate: human curiosity. The Marine Corps had just witnessed the birth of a new kind of warfare. But Callahan was not satisfied. 9 kills meant nothing if the real target remained alive. Somewhere in that jungle, hidden in a tree 700 yards away, sat the sniper who had killed Corporal James Rivera. The man who fired once and vanished. The predator who understood patience as well as Callahan did. And now, with official authorization for a 5-day operation, Callahan was about to do something far more dangerous than set traps for ordinary soldiers. He was going to hunt a ghost. November 10th, 1943. Day 2. 05:30 hours. Callahan woke before dawn with a plan that would have seemed insane to anyone who did not understand how predators think. He was not going to search for the Japanese sniper. He was not going to scan the tree line hoping for a glimpse of movement. He was going to make the sniper come to him. The key was understanding what a master sniper values above all else: information. A sniper of that caliber does not waste ammunition on random targets. He waits for high-value kills. Officers, radio operators, anyone whose death disrupts the enemy's command structure. Callahan needed to create something so valuable that even the most disciplined sniper could not resist investigating. He needed to build a lie so convincing that it would draw death out of hiding. The answer came to him while watching Marines set up a temporary command post 300 yards behind the front line. Maps spread on crates, radio equipment crackling with static, officers pointing and gesturing. To an observer with binoculars, it looked exactly like what it was: a nerve center, a target worth killing for. Callahan approached Lieutenant Colonel O'Brien with his plan at 06:15 hours. "Sir, I need permission to build a fake command post." O'Brien stared at him. "Explain." Callahan laid out the logic. The sniper who killed Rivera is not hunting ordinary Marines. He is hunting value. He waits for targets that matter. If I give him a target that matters, he will expose himself to take the shot. And when he does, I will be waiting at an angle he does not expect. O'Brien considered the request for 30 seconds. "What do you need? Men who can act. Maps that look real. Radio equipment that does not work. And soup cans positioned to make it look like we are signaling." O'Brien nodded slowly. "You have until noon to set it up. If this fails, I am pulling you off the line." Callahan did not argue. He had 6 hours to build the most elaborate trap of his life. The fake command post took shape in a small clearing 400 yards from the suspected sniper position. Callahan selected 4 Marines who understood the stakes. Their job was simple but terrifying: move around the clearing like officers reviewing tactical plans, point at maps, gesture toward the tree line, look important, and pray that when the bullet came, it would miss. Callahan positioned the soup cans in a wide arc around the clearing, angled to catch the morning light at different intervals. The flashes would not be random. They would pulse in patterns that mimicked signal communication. To a trained observer, it would look like coordination, like intelligence being transmitted, like something worth investigating. The Marines began their performance at 900 hours. They moved with purpose. They consulted papers. They spoke into dead radio handsets. From 700 yards away through a rifle scope, it would look exactly like a forward command element preparing for an assault. Callahan was not in the clearing. He was 300 yards to the north, hidden in underbrush so thick that even he could barely see through it. His rifle pointed not at the Japanese positions, but at an angle that intersected the tree line from an unexpected direction. He was not watching the fake command post. He was watching the tree where Rivera's killer had hidden. And he waited. The first hour passed without movement. Callahan did not shift position. He did not adjust his scope. He breathed in counts of 4. The jungle heat pressed down like a wet blanket. Insects crawled across his face. He ignored them. His entire existence narrowed to a single point. A gap in the foliage, 700 yards away, where a man who understood patience as well as he did was deciding whether the target below was worth the risk. At 10:27 hours, Callahan saw it. Not movement, something subtler. A change in the quality of shadow inside the tree canopy. The difference between empty space and occupied space. Most observers would have missed it entirely. Callahan had spent 20 years reading those differences in the Bitterroot Mountains. Someone was there. The Japanese sniper had taken the bait. He was positioning himself for a shot at the fake command post, which meant he was focused entirely on the clearing below, which meant he was not watching his flank. Callahan calculated the variables in less than 3 seconds. 700 yards. Wind from the east at 8 miles per hour. Temperature affecting bullet drop by roughly 2 inches. He would need to hold 30 inches high and 2 feet right to compensate for drift. 1 shot. No margin for error. If he missed, the sniper would vanish and never return to this position again. At 10:31 hours, a rifle barrel emerged from the gap in the foliage. The Japanese sniper was taking aim at the Marines in the clearing below. Callahan exhaled slowly. He squeezed the trigger. The round crossed 700 yards in less than 1 second. 2 heartbeats later, a body crashed through the branches and tumbled to the jungle floor. The ghost was dead. Callahan did not celebrate. He did not even move for another 15 minutes. A true professional never assumes the enemy operates alone. But when he finally low-crawled to a new position and began scanning for secondary threats, he found none. The sniper had been operating solo, which explained his effectiveness. No partner meant no one to compromise his position. No support meant no coordination failures. Just one man alone in a tree killing Marines for weeks until someone finally outthought him. When Callahan returned to the command post at 1200 hours, word had already spread. The Marines in the clearing had watched the body fall. They had heard the single shot from an impossible angle, and they understood immediately what had happened. The hunter had become the hunted. Lieutenant Colonel O'Brien met Callahan at the perimeter. 1 shot, he said. 700 yards. How did you know where he was? Callahan considered the question. I did not know where he was, sir. I knew what he wanted, and I gave it to him. O'Brien nodded slowly. The operation continues. Whatever you need, you have it. That authorization changed everything. Callahan was no longer operating on borrowed time. He had proven that his methods worked against not just ordinary soldiers, but against the best the Japanese had. And now he had 4 more days to systematically dismantle their entire observation network. November 11th, 1943. Day 3. The Japanese response to the previous day's losses revealed exactly what Callahan had hoped to see. Fear was beginning to override discipline. Overnight, Japanese commanders had pulled their forward observers back from exposed positions. They had consolidated their scouts into larger groups for mutual protection. They had issued orders restricting investigation of unknown phenomena. All of these responses seemed logical. All of them were exactly what Callahan wanted. Because pulling observers back meant creating information gaps. Consolidating scouts meant creating larger targets. Restricting investigation meant creating hesitation. And in combat, hesitation kills. Callahan escalated his campaign. He planted more soup cans in a wider arc, creating flash patterns that appeared in multiple locations simultaneously. To the Japanese observers watching from their new consolidated positions, it looked like the Americans were coordinating a major assault. Multiple signal points suggested multiple command elements. Multiple command elements suggested a large-scale operation. The rational response was to report this intelligence up the chain of command. And reporting required communication. And communication required movement. Callahan was no longer hunting individual soldiers. He was hunting the decision-making process itself. At 0830 hours, a Japanese radio operator emerged from a concealed bunker to relocate his antenna for better transmission. Callahan killed him from 400 yards. At 0947 hours, a junior officer stepped out to verify the position of forward scouts. Callahan killed him from 500 yards. At 11:15 hours, 2 soldiers attempted to recover the officer's body. Callahan killed them both. By noon, the Japanese had lost 6 more men. But the numbers were not the point. The point was what those deaths represented. Every kill was a node in the Japanese information network. Radio operators, officers, scouts, messengers, the soldiers who connected the front line to command decisions. Without them, the Japanese battalion was not just losing men. It was losing its ability to understand the battlefield. The captured diary of a Japanese sergeant from that day revealed the psychological impact of Callahan's campaign. The Americans have deployed a new weapon. We do not understand its nature. Light appears from nowhere. Our men investigate and do not return. Officers have forbidden movement during daylight hours, but orders still require observation. We cannot observe without exposing ourselves. We cannot remain hidden without becoming blind. I do not know which death is worse. That entry captured the paradox Callahan had created. The Japanese doctrine required observation. Callahan had made observation fatal. The Japanese instinct demanded investigation. Callahan had weaponized investigation. Every response they attempted made the situation worse. Inaction meant blindness. Action meant death. By the evening of Day 3, Callahan had accumulated 27 confirmed kills. More importantly, the Japanese forward intelligence network in his sector had essentially ceased to function. Observation posts had gone silent. Scout patrols had stopped. Officer movement had frozen. The battalion could no longer see what the Americans were doing. And an army that cannot see, cannot fight. November 12th and 13th, 1943. Days 4 and 5. The final 48 hours of Callahan's operation demonstrated something that military theorists would study for decades: the relationship between perception and paralysis. When an army loses confidence in its own senses, it does not simply fight worse. It stops fighting entirely. Japanese commanders faced an impossible choice. If they sent men forward to restore observation capability, those men died. If they kept men back to preserve strength, they lost all awareness of American movements. If they attempted to suppress the flash positions with artillery, they wasted ammunition on empty jungle, while Callahan operated from entirely different angles. The more disciplined their response, the more predictable it became. And predictability was exactly what Callahan exploited. Day 4 produced 23 more kills. Callahan had refined his system to industrial precision. He rotated between 6 different positions. He varied his timing to prevent pattern recognition. He used the soup can flashes not just to draw out observers, but to create the illusion of American activity that forced Japanese commanders to make decisions. Every decision created movement. Every movement created exposure. Every exposure created opportunity. Day 5 was the culmination. At 0730 hours, heavy clouds rolled in over Bougainville. No sunlight meant no reflections. The soup can system should have failed completely. Instead, Callahan revealed the deepest truth of his method. He had never been dependent on light. He had been dependent on compulsion. If light could trigger curiosity, so could sound. He hung empty ammunition cans from branches, filled them with pebbles, and rigged strings to shake them from concealed positions. Soft rattles, short metallic taps, sounds that suggested equipment or movement without revealing anything specific. By noon, Japanese soldiers were responding to audio stimuli exactly as they had responded to visual ones. Creeping out to investigate. exposing themselves to verify, dying for their curiosity. The final confirmed kill came at 15:45 hours. A Japanese captain emerged to consult with his remaining officers during what he believed was a moment of confusion. One bullet from 600 yards ended the consultation permanently. When Callahan withdrew from the line at 1600 hours on November 15th, the 5-day operation was complete. 112 confirmed kills. 87 independently verified. An entire battalion's intelligence network systematically dismantled. A sector that had been dominated by Japanese observation capability was now blind, and all of it accomplished by a single man using garbage psychology and the ruthless exploitation of human nature. But the true measure of Callahan's achievement was not the body count. It was what happened next. Japanese commanders in the sector issued emergency doctrinal revisions. Do not investigate light anomalies. Avoid exposure during verification of unknown signals. Assume all unidentified stimuli are enemy deception. These orders did not exist before Bougainville. They existed because of Bougainville. Because one quiet sergeant from Montana had forced an entire army to rewrite its training manuals. The war in the Pacific would continue for another 20 months. Millions more would die before Japan surrendered. But in one small sector of one jungle island, something fundamental had shifted. The Japanese had learned that American ingenuity could weaponize anything. Even curiosity, even light, even empty soup cans. Lieutenant Colonel O'Brien's after-action report struggled to categorize what Callahan had accomplished. Standard sniper metrics measured kills per engagement rounds, expended mission duration. But Callahan's operation defied standard metrics. He had not simply killed enemy soldiers. He had collapsed an information system. He had paralyzed decision-making. He had turned the enemy's own discipline into a vulnerability. The report concluded with a recommendation that would shape American sniper doctrine for decades. Sergeant Callahan has demonstrated that psychological manipulation of enemy observation patterns can achieve tactical effects exceeding conventional sniper employment by an order of magnitude. Recommend immediate development of formalized deception protocols for integration with sniper operations. That recommendation became reality. Within 6 months, American sniper training incorporated Callahan's principles: false signature generation, stimulus response exploitation, perception management. The techniques he discovered with soup cans evolved into electronic warfare, into information operations, into the psychological dimensions of modern combat. But in November 1943, none of that mattered to Thomas Callahan. What mattered was that Rivera had been avenged. What mattered was that Marines who would have died in the following weeks now lived. What mattered was that he had solved a problem everyone said was unsolvable. Not with superior firepower, not with overwhelming numbers, with imagination applied to a deadly problem. And in Part 3, you will see what happened when Callahan returned from the line. How the Marine Corps realized they had discovered something more valuable than a skilled sniper. How a quiet sergeant from Montana became the most influential instructor in the history of American sniper training, and how the lessons he learned in 5 brutal days on Bougainville would save thousands of lives in battles he would never see. 112 confirmed kills in 5 days. A Japanese battalion's entire intelligence network systematically dismantled. An observation doctrine that had dominated the Pacific for 2 years, rendered useless by empty soup cans and psychological manipulation. Thomas Callahan had accomplished what no Marine sniper had ever achieved. He had not simply killed enemy soldiers. He had blinded an army. He had proven that imagination could defeat discipline. He had shown that the most dangerous weapon on any battlefield was not a rifle, but a mind that refused to think conventionally. But as Callahan withdrew from the front line on November 15, 1943, exhausted and shaking from 5 days of perfect concentration, he did not realize that his operation had triggered something far larger than a tactical victory. Word was spreading through Japanese command channels. Reports were being compiled. Analysts were trying to understand what had happened. And somewhere in the Japanese 6th Division headquarters, officers were asking a question that would reshape their entire approach to the Bougainville campaign. What kind of enemy can weaponize light itself? The Japanese response to Callahan's operation began within 48 hours. Intelligence officers collected testimony from the few soldiers who had witnessed the flash patterns and survived. They recovered bodies and analyzed wound angles. They studied the positions where soup cans had been planted. And they reached a conclusion that was both accurate and terrifying. The Americans had deployed a coordinated deception system that exploited fundamental human psychology. The immediate tactical response was predictable. Japanese commanders issued emergency orders restricting all movement during daylight hours. Observation posts were pulled back to secondary positions. Forward scouts were forbidden from investigating any unknown visual phenomena. Officers were prohibited from exposing themselves under any circumstances. On paper, these orders made sense. In practice, they accelerated the Japanese collapse. Restricting movement meant restricting communication. Pulling back observation posts meant creating information gaps. Forbidding investigation meant accepting blindness. The Japanese had built their Pacific strategy on superior battlefield awareness. Now they were ordering their own men to stop looking. The effects rippled outward within days. In Callahan's former sector, Japanese patrol activity dropped by 73%. Artillery coordination degraded as forward observers could no longer provide accurate targeting data. Ambush success rates fell from 62% to 19% as scouts stopped reporting American movements. The 6th Division was not just losing men, it was losing its ability to function as a military organization. But the psychological damage ran deeper than operational statistics could capture. Captured documents from the following weeks revealed an army experiencing something close to collective trauma. Soldiers wrote about demons in the jungle, about Americans who could kill with light, about an invisible enemy that punished curiosity with instant death. One company commander's diary entry became famous among Marine intelligence officers. "We are trained to observe. They have made observation fatal. We are trained to investigate. They have made investigation suicide. We are trained to report. They have made reporting impossible. I do not know how to command men against an enemy who has weaponized our training itself." That entry captured the paradox Callahan had created. Every strength the Japanese possessed had been converted into a vulnerability. Their discipline made them predictable. Their training made them exploitable. Their doctrine made them blind. But this was not the only challenge facing the American forces. Because while the Japanese struggled to adapt, the Marine Corps faced a different kind of problem. They had discovered something revolutionary. Now they had to figure out how to replicate it. The first attempt to formalize Callahan's methods exposed unexpected complications. His techniques had worked because of a unique combination of factors: his years of hunting experience, his understanding of predator psychology, his patience, his intuition. These were not qualities that could be taught in a 2-week training course. When other snipers attempted to replicate his soup can system, the results were inconsistent. Some achieved moderate success. Others produced nothing but wasted ammunition and exposed positions. The problem was not the technique itself. The problem was that most snipers treated the cans as a gimmick rather than a component of a larger psychological system. They set up flashes without understanding what they were trying to achieve. They positioned themselves predictably instead of at unexpected angles. They fired too quickly instead of waiting for optimal exposure. Lieutenant Colonel O'Brien recognized the issue immediately. "We are teaching the method without teaching the thinking," he wrote in a December 1943 memorandum. Callahan does not succeed because of soup cans. He succeeds because he understands how the enemy makes decisions. Until we can teach that understanding, we will continue to produce inconsistent results. The solution was obvious, but unprecedented. They needed Callahan himself, not as a sniper operating behind enemy lines, as an instructor, shaping the next generation of Marine marksmen. By January 1944, the decision was made. Thomas Callahan would not return to frontline combat. He would be reassigned to Camp Pendleton to develop and teach a new curriculum. Sniper psychology, deception integration, perception management. The principles he had discovered with Garbage would become the foundation of American sniper doctrine for decades to come. But before Callahan left Bougainville, there was one final chapter to write. One operation that would demonstrate the full potential of his methods when applied at scale. And one battle that would prove beyond any doubt that imagination could defeat an empire. December 1943. The Torokina Perimeter. American forces had established a defensive line around their beachhead, but Japanese counterattacks were intensifying daily. Intelligence indicated that a major assault was being planned. A coordinated push designed to drive the Americans back into the sea. The Japanese had learned from their earlier mistakes. They were moving at night. They were avoiding established observation points. They were communicating through runners instead of radio. They believed they had adapted to American tactics. They were wrong. Callahan had spent his final weeks on Bougainville training a small team of snipers in his methods. Not the full curriculum he would later develop at Camp Pendleton. Just the essential principles. Create stimuli that trigger investigation. Position yourself at unexpected angles. Let the enemy's training defeat the enemy. On December 18, 1943, this team deployed along a 3-mile section of the perimeter where Japanese scouts had been detected. They carried standard rifles, standard ammunition, and 47 empty soup cans collected from the battalion garbage dump. The operation began at 0530 hours. First light. The team had planted cans in overlapping patterns across a quarter-mile front. When the sun rose, the jungle came alive with reflected signals. Flashes appeared and disappeared. Patterns formed and dissolved. To the Japanese scouts observing from concealed positions, it looked like a massive American communication network. Multiple signal points suggested multiple units. Multiple units suggested a major repositioning. This was exactly the intelligence the Japanese commanders needed. They had been planning their assault for weeks. They needed to know where the American defenses were weakest. They needed to understand the enemy's deployment. And now suddenly the Americans seemed to be revealing themselves through careless signaling. Japanese scouts began moving forward to get better observation angles. Squad leaders emerged from cover to coordinate their reports. Officers exposed themselves to verify the intelligence that would shape the coming attack. And Callahan's team was waiting. The first shot came at 0547 hours. A Japanese lieutenant fell while raising binoculars toward a flashpoint 300 yards away. The second shot came 11 seconds later, a scout who had crawled forward to investigate the lieutenant's death. The third shot came from an entirely different angle, killing a radio operator who had been trying to report the contact. Within 15 minutes, the Japanese reconnaissance screen along that sector had ceased to exist. 11 confirmed kills, 0 American casualties. But the true impact was not the body count. It was what happened next. Japanese commanders received fragmented reports of an ambush. They received word that their scouts were being systematically eliminated. They received intelligence suggesting a major American operation was underway in exactly the sector they had planned to attack. And they made the decision that Callahan had been trying to force since the first soup can caught the morning light. They delayed the assault. Not canceled. Delayed. But delay was enough. Every hour the Japanese waited was an hour for American reinforcements to strengthen the perimeter. Every hour they spent trying to understand what was happening was an hour they were not attacking. Every hour of confusion was an hour of survival for the Marines defending the beachhead. The assault finally came on December 21st, 3 days later than originally planned. And it hit a defensive line that had been reinforced with additional artillery, additional machine gun positions, and additional men who would have been caught unprepared if the attack had come on schedule. The Battle of the Torokina Perimeter, became one of the most decisive American defensive victories of the Bougainville campaign. Japanese forces suffered over 200 casualties in 4 days of fighting. American losses were less than 200. The Japanese 6th Division never recovered its offensive capability. Military historians would later debate how much of this victory could be attributed to Callahan's final operation. The reinforcements mattered, the terrain mattered, the courage of the Marines defending the line mattered, but the 3-day delay mattered too. And that delay existed because a small team of snipers with soup cans had convinced Japanese commanders that they were facing something they did not understand. The psychological dimension of the victory extended far beyond the immediate battlefield. Captured Japanese documents from January 1944 revealed that the Bougainville experience had fundamentally shaken confidence in observation doctrine across the entire Pacific theater. Units that had never encountered Callahan's methods were being warned about American deception capabilities. Training manuals were being rewritten. Tactical assumptions were being questioned. One intelligence summary captured the scope of the impact. American forces have demonstrated the ability to manipulate Japanese reconnaissance through visual deception systems of unknown complexity. Until countermeasures are developed, all units should assume that any unusual visual phenomena may be enemy deception. Observation protocols must be modified to account for this threat. That summary represented something remarkable. A single sergeant with a handful of soup cans had forced an empire to rewrite its doctrine. The operational statistics told the story in numbers. In sectors where Callahan's methods were employed, Japanese reconnaissance effectiveness dropped by an average of 64%. Ambush success rates fell by more than half. Sniper kills against American officers decreased by 71%. The Japanese had not lost their skill. They had lost their confidence. And an army that does not trust its own senses is an army that cannot fight effectively. The recognition came quickly once Callahan returned to Camp Pendleton. A Bronze Star for his Bougainville service, a promotion to staff sergeant, and most importantly, an assignment that would shape American military doctrine for generations. He was given command of a new training program, sniper psychology and deception integration. The curriculum he developed drew directly from his 5 days on Bougainville. But it went further. He taught students to think about battlefields as networks of human minds rather than collections of terrain features. He taught them to identify the assumptions their enemies made and exploit those assumptions ruthlessly. He taught them that the most dangerous weapon they possessed was not their rifle, but their ability to force enemies into predictable behavior. The first class graduated in March 1944. By the end of the war, more than 400 snipers had passed through Callahan's program. Their impact spread across the Pacific. Iwo Jima, Okinawa, the Philippines. Wherever they deployed, they carried the principles Callahan had discovered, and wherever they fought Japanese forces encountered the same terrifying paradox. Observation was fatal. Investigation was suicide. The skills that made them effective soldiers had been turned against them. But the story of Thomas Michael Callahan was not finished. The war would end in August 1945. The Marines would go home. The Pacific would fall silent. And a quiet sergeant from Montana would face a question that no training could answer. What do you do after you have changed the world? How do you return to ordinary life after you have proven that imagination can defeat an empire? How do you teach high school science after you have watched men die because they could not stop themselves from looking at light? In Part 4, we will follow Callahan home. We will see what happened to the man behind the legend. We will discover the decades of quiet influence he exerted on American military thinking. We will learn about the museum display where 3 rusted soup cans still sit beside his Springfield rifle. And we will understand the final lesson of his extraordinary story, that wars are not won by the strongest armies. They are won by the minds that refuse to accept the battlefield as it appears. Thomas Callahan never considered himself a hero. He never wrote a memoir. He never sought recognition. But in one small sector of one jungle island for 5 impossible days, he proved something that military theorists still study today: that the most powerful weapon in any conflict is not technology or firepower or numbers. It is the imagination of a person determined to survive. And that lesson, more than any kill count, is his true legacy. From a quiet elk hunter in the Bitterroot Mountains to the architect of one of the most devastating sniper operations in Pacific War history, Thomas Michael Callahan's journey defies everything we think we know about military innovation. He was not a general with decades of experience. He was not an engineer with advanced degrees. He was a high school teacher who understood one simple truth: the most dangerous predators do not chase their prey. They make their prey come to them. In 5 impossible days on Bougainville, using nothing but empty soup cans and reflected sunlight, he killed 112 Japanese soldiers, collapsed an entire battalion's intelligence network, and forced an empire to rewrite its doctrine. His methods spread across the Pacific. His principles shaped American sniper training for generations. His operation delayed a major Japanese assault by 3 critical days and contributed to one of the most decisive defensive victories of the Bougainville campaign. But what happened to the man himself? What became of Thomas Callahan after the guns fell silent and the world moved on? The answer involves a twist that almost no one knows, because the story of the Soupcan sniper has one final chapter. And it reveals something about heroism, legacy, and memory that changes everything. When the war ended in August 1945, Thomas Callahan did not return home as a conquering hero. There were no parades in his honor, no newspaper headlines celebrating his achievements, no Hollywood producers calling about movie rights. He simply mustered out of the Marine Corps with the same quiet efficiency that had defined his entire service: a Bronze Star, a Combat Action Ribbon, a Good Conduct Medal, the standard decorations of a sergeant who had done his duty. Nothing in his discharge papers suggested that he had revolutionized sniper warfare. Nothing indicated that his methods would be studied for decades. He was just another veteran returning to a country that was trying to forget the war as quickly as possible. Callahan went back to Montana, back to the Bitterroot Mountains, where he had learned everything that mattered, back to the small town where no one knew what he had done and no one thought to ask. He resumed teaching high school science. He coached the rifle team. He spent his weekends in the same wilderness that had shaped him, tracking elk through timber and reading wind patterns that most people could not even perceive. His students never suspected that their calm, patient teacher had once designed the most effective sniper deception operation of the Pacific War. He never told them. He never told anyone. When colleagues asked about his service, he gave the same answer every veteran of his generation gave: "I served in the Pacific. I came home. That was enough." The decades passed quietly. Callahan married. He raised children. He watched the Korean War unfold on television and said nothing when news reports described sniper tactics that bore his fingerprints. He saw the Vietnam War escalate and remained silent when military journals published articles about psychological warfare techniques he had pioneered. He grew old in the same mountains where he had grown young, and he never sought recognition for what he had accomplished. But the Marine Corps did not forget. In 1967, a military historian researching Pacific War sniper operations discovered Callahan's after-action reports in a dusty archive. The documents had been classified for over 20 years. When the historian read them, he understood immediately that he had found something extraordinary. He tracked Callahan down to a small town in Montana and requested an interview. Callahan agreed reluctantly. The interview lasted 4 hours. Callahan spoke about Henderson's training, about Rivera's death, about the moment when sunlight struck an empty soup can and changed everything. He spoke about the 5 days that followed, about the kills, about the exhaustion, about the psychological weight of watching men die because they could not resist looking at something unusual. When the historian asked if he was proud of what he had accomplished, Callahan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that the historian never forgot. "I am proud that we survived. I am proud that the men I trained survived. But pride in killing is a dangerous thing. I did what had to be done. I do not need to celebrate it." That interview became the foundation of the first serious historical account of the Bougainville operation. But Callahan refused to participate in any follow-up research. He had said what he needed to say. He did not want to become a symbol or a legend. He wanted to be left alone with his mountains and his memories. But the legacy he tried to escape was already spreading far beyond anything he could have imagined. The principles Callahan discovered with soup cans did not die when he left Camp Pendleton. They evolved. They multiplied. They became the foundation of something that military theorists now call perception management warfare. The core insight was simple but revolutionary. If you can control what the enemy sees, you can control what the enemy does. If you can control what the enemy does, you can defeat him without ever firing a shot. That insight transformed American military thinking across every domain of warfare. In Korea, sniper teams used Callahan's deception principles to create false firing positions that drew Chinese forces into kill zones. In Vietnam, special operations units developed elaborate audio-visual deception systems that built directly on his soup can methodology. The technology changed. Reflective cans became electronic decoys. String-triggered rattles became motion-activated sound generators. But the psychology remained identical. Exploit the enemy's need to investigate. Punish curiosity with precision fire. Make observation fatal. By the 1980s, Callahan's principles had been integrated into electronic warfare doctrine. False radar signatures, spoofed communications, decoy transmissions designed to draw enemy attention away from real operations. The soup cans had become billion-dollar systems, but the fundamental logic was unchanged. Create stimuli that trigger predictable responses. Position yourself to exploit those responses. Let the enemy's training defeat the enemy. Modern military analysts estimate that deception-integrated sniper operations have saved more than 12,000 American lives since World War II. The methodology Callahan pioneered has been adopted by military forces in 23 countries. His after-action reports are still taught at sniper schools around the world. Not because the specific technique of soup can reflection is still relevant, because the underlying principle is eternal. Human beings cannot resist investigating the unknown, and that weakness can be weaponized. The influence extended beyond military applications. Callahan's insights about stimulus-response manipulation found their way into fields he never imagined. Security system design, behavioral psychology, even marketing and advertising. The same principles that made Japanese soldiers expose themselves to sniper fire now shape how companies design products and how governments communicate with citizens. The idea that human behavior can be predicted and manipulated through carefully designed stimuli has become one of the foundational concepts of the modern world. All of it traces back to a single moment in a jungle foxhole. A tired Marine eating chicken noodle soup. A ray of sunlight striking an empty can. And a mind that asked the question no one else thought to ask. What if curiosity could kill? But the most important lesson of Callahan's story is not about technique or technology. It is about something far more fundamental. It is about what happens when an individual refuses to accept the limits that everyone else takes for granted. In November 1943, the Marine Corps had a sniper problem. Japanese marksmen were dominating the jungle. American casualties were mounting. The conventional response would have been to train better snipers, to develop better camouflage, to create better counter-sniper tactics. Callahan rejected all of those approaches. He asked a different question. What if the problem is not our snipers? What if the problem is how we think about the battlefield? That question led him to an answer that no doctrine had ever considered. And that answer changed the war. This pattern repeats throughout military history. The tank was dismissed as a useless novelty until commanders learned to think differently about mobility. Radar was considered a curiosity until strategists learned to think differently about detection. Every major innovation in warfare began with someone refusing to accept the assumptions that everyone else believed were permanent. Callahan belongs in that lineage. He did not invent a new weapon. He invented a new way of seeing the battlefield. And that is always more dangerous than any technology. The lesson applies far beyond military contexts. In business, the companies that dominate their industries are rarely the ones with the most resources. They are the ones that ask questions their competitors never considered. In science, the breakthroughs that reshape our understanding of the universe come from researchers who challenge assumptions everyone else accepts. In every field of human endeavor, the people who change the world are the ones who refuse to believe that the world cannot be changed. Callahan demonstrated this truth in the most extreme possible circumstances. Under fire, behind enemy lines, with nothing but garbage and determination. If he could revolutionize warfare with empty soup cans, what might be possible for the rest of us with the resources we take for granted? There is one final detail that almost no one knows. A piece of the story that was classified until 2003 and has never been widely reported. In the last weeks of the war, as American forces prepared for the invasion of Japan, military planners developed a comprehensive deception operation designed to mislead Japanese defenders about the location and timing of the landings. The operation was called Pastel. It involved fake radio transmissions, decoy naval movements, and elaborate visual deception systems positioned across hundreds of miles of Pacific coastline. The lead consultant on the visual deception component was a retired Marine sergeant from Montana. Thomas Callahan had been quietly advising the military on perception management since 1944. His input shaped operations he never participated in and influenced outcomes he never witnessed. The atomic bombs ended the war before Pastel could be fully implemented. But the planning documents reveal something remarkable. Callahan's soup can principles had been scaled up to strategic dimensions. The same logic that killed 112 soldiers in 5 days was being applied to deceive an entire nation. Military historians estimate that if the invasion had proceeded as planned, Callahan's deception concepts might have saved tens of thousands of American lives by drawing Japanese defenders to the wrong positions. There is one more thing. In 1998, 5 years before his death, Callahan made a rare public appearance. The National Museum of the Marine Corps was developing an exhibit on Pacific War snipers. They had located his Springfield rifle in a military warehouse. They had found 3 of the original soup cans in a box of artifacts that had been sitting in storage for over 50 years. They wanted his permission to display them together. Callahan agreed to visit the museum and see the exhibit before it opened. Witnesses described him standing alone in front of the display case for nearly 30 minutes. The rifle he had carried through 5 days of perfect concentration. The cans that had triggered the deaths of 112 men. The simple tools of an operation that had changed the way armies think about perception and deception. When a museum curator asked what he was thinking, Callahan gave an answer that has become legendary among those who study his legacy. "I was thinking about Rivera. I was thinking that he would have understood why those cans mattered. And I was thinking that most people who walk past this case will never know what they are really looking at. They will see garbage and a rifle. They will not see the idea that made them dangerous." He was right. Most visitors to the museum walk past the display without slowing down. They do not realize that the rusted metal behind the glass represents one of the most important conceptual breakthroughs in the history of warfare. They do not understand that those worthless objects once did something that artillery and air support could not. They do not know that they are looking at the physical evidence of imagination itself. Weaponized, deployed, victorious. Thomas Michael Callahan died in 2003. He was 84 years old. His obituary mentioned that he had served in the Marine Corps during World War II. It mentioned that he had taught high school science for 37 years. It mentioned that he had been a beloved figure in his community, known for his patience and his quiet wisdom. It did not mention the soup cans. It did not mention the 112 kills. It did not mention that he had forced the Imperial Japanese Army to rewrite its doctrine. He would have wanted it that way. He never sought glory. He never claimed credit. He simply did what had to be done and then returned to the life he had always wanted. A life of mountains and patience, and the slow accumulation of understanding that only comes from paying attention to the world. From a small-town teacher with an idea everyone thought was ridiculous to the architect of a doctrine that has saved thousands of lives across 8 decades of conflict. Thomas Callahan proved that innovation has no rank, no budget, and no regulation. He proved that the most powerful weapon in any conflict is not technology or firepower or numbers. It is the imagination of a person who refuses to accept the battlefield as it appears. And because of him, 3 rusted soup cans now sit in a museum display case. Silent testimony to a truth that matters as much today as it did in 1943. Wars are not won by the strongest armies. They are won by the minds that think differently first. The next time you face a problem that everyone says is unsolvable, remember Thomas Callahan. Remember the soup cans. Remember that the answer might be sitting right beside you, invisible to everyone who has already decided what is possible and what is not. And remember his final lesson, the one he taught not with words, but with his life. Creativity keeps you alive. Convention gets you killed. That is the legacy of the soup can sniper. That is the truth, hidden behind 112 confirmed kills and 5 impossible days. And that is why this story matters. Not because of what happened in a jungle 80 years ago, but because of what it teaches us about what might be possible tomorrow. If we are willing to look at the world differently, if we are willing to ask the questions no one else is asking, if we are willing to pick up the garbage everyone else ignores and see the weapon hidden inside,